knowledge about bird migration, because technology is allowing humans to attach devices on birds and find out where they go, how fast they go, and how quickly they come back to where they might have nested or resided the summer before. And it's amazing, some of the things that are coming out. The stamina of birds is incredible, the physiological demands of migration in some cases, and the accuracy required for them to get to where they want to winter, perhaps, and then come back to where they want to summer. So we'll get into it. So let's move into amazing bird migration. Oh, got to go the other way. All right. So what is migration? What is migration? Well, migration is the movement from one region to another with the change of seasons. And in this case, it's birds. And about 75% of North American birds migrate at least some distance. Some incredible distances, some not so far. But they move from one place to the other with the change of seasons. But not all birds migrate. We do have birds, as most of you know, black-capped chickadees are pretty much with us year-round. Downy woodpeckers are another species that pretty much stay all year long. Blue jays are another example. In some cases, some of these birds do migrate a little bit, the young birds of the year, but basically they're sedentary and stay with us. So they have special adaptations that they need to have that the migratory birds don't. They have to get through the seasons and get enough food, enough shelter, enough warmth to survive from one year to the next. Migrants have a whole other set of challenges. The champion migrant historically, when I was a little guy, like some of you folks are, smaller, it was always viewed as the long-distance migration champion in North America, if not the world, because they nest in the high Arctic and end up down on the Antarctic shelf for the winter. Something in the order of 20 to 25 round-trip miles a year. And you can imagine if an Arctic tern lives to be 20 or 30 years old, which they might, that's a lot of miles before your life is finished. And that has to be sort of an unerring circuit every year with storms and all manner of other conditions. Now, let's see what's going on here. Okay, why migrate? I don't know why that blank. Anyway, why migrant? Why migrate? Well, there's various aspects here. There's certainly, if you're a bird living here and you eat insects, there's a greater availability of food as the weather turns cold somewhere else. So you would have a better availability to feed. There could be fewer predators depending on where you're migrating from and going to. Longer days. In the case of birds coming back here in the spring, they certainly have longer days in which to raise a family, find food for themselves and for their young. And there's that opportunity to raise their young in warmer conditions than they might otherwise have, but it's mainly food related. I'm not sure why these blanks, but anyway. Okay. What other influences might cause a bird to migrate? Well, favorable winds are one thing, because you're going to travel, you want to conserve energy. So if the winds are more favorable to a certain season, that's an incentive to go. A warmer or cooler weather, spring or fall, which is pretty obvious. So there's not all birds migrate. Not all birds migrate long distances. The white-throated sparrow, for example, most of you may be familiar with white-throated sparrows. If you have a cottage, you'll hear it singing, "Oh, Canada, Canada, Canada," in the springtime and summer, or you might come to your bird feeder or your backyard. So it's a bird that doesn't fly outside North America. But because we end up with snow and cold weather, they do have to go further south, most of them, in order to successfully survive. So that's one that doesn't leave North America, and we call that a short-distance migrant. A cedar waxwing would be a medium-distance migrant. That's another quite common bird that we have that feeds on berries and is often around backyards and roadsides. And that bird goes a little further. It goes, there's sort of a northern population, which we have here in our latitude in Canada. Then there's another band that you can see there in darker blue that is sort of a year-round population. And then further down is the wintering population of the ones that are shown on the map in pink. So our birds would go down into the southern United States and into Mexico. So that would be a medium distance migrant. I know what's happening. We're not seeing the photographs, or I'm not seeing the photographs. You're seeing the photographs. Good, okay, great. I was worried that you weren't seeing some of the visuals. So the long distance migrant would be an example, and there's a lot of the shorebirds are long distance migrants, would be an American golden plover, which nests in the high Arctic. Oh, there we are. And as you can see, would migrate from the area up there in red all the way down through our region here, and we do get them as they're going south, all the way down through the Atlantic region here, and then straight out over the North Atlantic, all the way down to the northern coast of South America, and further than that, all the way down into the Pampas areas of Argentina for the winter. That is a very long trek. And then, in the springtime, they would move back up again, but not out over the ocean this time, and there's a reason for that, up through the central area of the continent, through Central America, and on up through the prairies, and then fanning out back out into the high Arctic where they would nest. And Jean and I were in Churchill, Manitoba many years ago, and we saw American golden plovers nesting on the tundra right here, sort of the southern part of their range, and even that was really far north. So you can see these amazing long-distance treks. And there's reasons for that, and there's reasons why the routes have evolved over a very long time for these birds to take the best route that gives them the best chance of getting to where they want to be in the shortest period of time. And then there's birds of the ocean, and this is more recent information, birds called shearwaters. We have tens of thousands of these birds that visit the Bay of Fundy in the summer months. These birds nest on the other side of the equator. So during their winter down there, it's summer here, and vice versa. So they've all gone back south now, but they were here in the Bay of Fundy all summer. And these birds, back in the early 2000s, some research work, groundbreaking, was done here in the Bay of Fundy by taking these shearwaters and putting tracking devices on them, and then seeing where they went day by day during the course of the remainder of the year. And so there's two kinds of shearwaters. One is the great shearwater on the left, and the other is the sooty shearwater. And between the two, a number of each species were I call it radio collared, was like a little backpack that was put on them. And it would emit a beam that could be picked up by satellite and then tracked day by day. So the first, they put names on them all. Carlin was a sooty shearwater, the darker of the two, and it flew from the Bay of Fundy, where it spent some time after having had the device put on it, straight out easterly over to the coast of Africa, down along the coast of Africa, and all the way down to the coast of South Africa, so that by January the 7th, and it was affixed, the device was affixed on August the 30th, it flew 17,650 kilometers over a trackless ocean, but obviously knowing exactly where it wanted to go, where the best food would be down there. And this is only part of its story, because the rest of the year would see it spend the winter down there, if it wasn't nesting on one of those islands, feeding at least, and then moving back north to the Bay of Fundy in a big circle by the next summer. 17,000 in part of a year. But that's not the most amazing. The other one that was tagged was a great shearwater. That's the one on the left in that previous picture. And again, it didn't follow the same track, but it did spend time after being tagged, and then it didn't go all the way to the coast of Africa, but straight down through the middle of the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, across the equator, on down to the mouth of the Uruguay River, here between Uruguay and Argentina, spent some time down there, perhaps getting lots of food, across to the south coast of Africa, and spent more of its time down in that latitude, and flew a total of 41,800 kilometers between August 14th and Christmas. Imagine in the course of a year what that bird would travel and presumably make its way back to the Bay of Fundy. How do they navigate? How do they do it? How do they know where the food is? No one knows for sure. So, some amazing stuff, and we're just getting started. So, various kinds of migration. This is a chucker, which is a partridge introduced in North America, but more widely spread in Asia. Chuckers are high altitude in the mountains and the Rockies, the whole Rocky chain, particularly in the southwest. And they move down from the highlands down to the lowlands. So migration isn't necessarily covering a geographical distance as much as it can be altitude as well, because obviously in winter, the lower reaches would provide more food potential. This one is American tree sparrow. And American tree sparrows nest in the Arctic, above the Arctic Circle. And in the fall, just about now, they're coming down into southern Canada because, again, there'll be more available food. They'll come to bird feeders, roadsides, weed patches, where further north, food wouldn't be nearly as available. So that's another example, from north to south for the winter, and then back north again in the spring. The next example would be an eruptive migrant, which would be something like a common redpoll, which is, again, another bird that nests at or above the Arctic Circle and feeds on seeds of alder and birch and dwarf birch, and then comes down here only when it needs to, when the crop of seeds up there isn't good enough, and that happens periodically. So it'll come down as far as it needs to, flocks, and start feeding, and then go back up again in the spring. So there's day migrants, and then there's night migrants. And why would some choose to migrate during the day? Why would others choose to migrate at night? Well, there's reasons. First of all, with day migrants, there's the opportunity to conserve energy. And by that, we mean they can feed as they travel. The other thing is, the problem is that there is danger from predators during the day, like hawks, shrikes, things like that, that might not be there at night. But they prefer to do this because these guys that do migration during the day, like a hummingbird, for example, pretty hard for a predator to catch. They're very quick and elusive. Swallows, barn swallows, tree swallows, tend to migrate by day, and both these kinds of birds can feed as they go. So they don't have to store a lot of energy before attempting a migration. Some, but not very much. So that's why some of them have evolved to have a day migration compared to migrating at night. So that begs the question, why would birds choose to fly at night? It's dark, colder, whatever. Well, let's investigate that. Sorry, we haven't quite got to that yet. Some of the other day migrants I just would mention migrate in flocks, like flocks of blackbirds, 200-300 at a time. And of course, if you're in a flock like that, the chance of getting picked off by a predator is less because it's the other guy might get caught or the one over there rather than you. So these flocking birds tend to rely on that, that safety in numbers, so to speak. And of course, they can also stop and feed as they go. A lot of these aren't showing up on my screen here, so I have to look up on the screen to know where we are. Oh yeah, the other thing with day flying birds is another strategy is used by hawks. And that is when the sun shines on the surface of the earth, some areas of the earth absorb that heat from the sun, the solar energy. Other areas, depending on what they are, can reflect the heat. And those that reflect it, eventually, as the day goes on, a column of rising warm air develops over that area where the heat is reflected from the Earth's surface. That column of warm air can go up 3,000-4,000 feet. Glider pilots use it to stay within it and gain altitude. Well, birds like hawks do the same thing, especially the hawks that soar with a bit of a dihedral with their wings, because they can tilt and make a quick turn to stay within the thermal. And that can carry a hawk way, way up, at which point, when the thermal starts to dissipate, thousands of feet in the air in some cases, the hawk soars out of that and heads further south, picks up another thermal, up it goes, and so on all the way along, expending very little energy, but traveling hundreds of miles potentially on a good day. And so we have hawks here, like the broad-winged hawk, our common summer hawk. That's a picture of a kettle, meaning a bunch of hawks in that in a thermal, rising up and then getting ready to soar out. And at Greenlaw Mountain down near St. Andrews, the St. John Naturalist Club operates a hawk watch. And in late September every year, there could be as many as 5,000 hawks in a day seen going over Greenlaw and passing down, headed south in the United States. And a lot of those are using, most of them are using thermals to get from point A to point B. So that's another advantage of day flying for certain strategies. This is the route that those hawks would take. And if you'll notice, it's very interesting, across this wide swath east of the Rockies, this is broad-winged hawks, they basically have to funnel down through Central America, especially down through Panama, here where it's really, really narrow, about 80 miles wide. And then the broad wings flow into northern South America, and some stay in Central. And then the Swainson's hawks, which are the western sort of counterpart, they go all the way down into Argentina, like some of the other birds we looked at already. So a lot of evolution here and different strategies on migration. So night migrants, why would they evolve a night migrating strategy? It would have disadvantages, but obviously the advantages must outweigh the disadvantages. Well, a lot easier to avoid predators. Those annoying predators are always after you. Cooler temperatures at night, so you don't overheat. And if you're working hard to flap away, it probably would be more efficient. There tends to be less wind on average at night. And they can feed and rest during the day. So what these night migrants do is they will feed up and get some energy and fat stores, and then they'll make a long night flight and then drop down and feed the next day, maybe take a day or two, and then up they go again another night when things are favorable, fly as far as they can, drop down at dawn, and so on. And a lot of our migrant songbirds have that strategy, a whole spectrum of them. And I think we have an example. Yes. Ralph Eldridge is the lighthouse keeper, one of the lighthouse keepers at Machias Seal Island, which is down off Grand Manan off the coast of Maine. It's the one that's contested between Canada and the United States for ownership. And Machias Seal has the only lighthouse keeper stationed, I think now in Atlantic Canada, and that's to put a stake in our territory down there so that those Americans don't come in and sort of claim occupancy. Both countries, on a friendly basis, have talked about ownership for years. Anyway, he's there. He's really interested in birds and a photographer. So he took these pictures at night of migrating songbirds. It was a night when they dropped in on the island near the lighthouse, were attracted by the lights, and we can see a whole array sitting on the windowsill of the lighthouse. Redstart, ovenbird, easternwood pewee, Wilson's warbler, I like that name, magnolia warbler, and there's another one, a whole array of various species. There's our white-throated sparrows lined up on another windowsill, and birds on the wires outside. Thousands of birds coming in on Machias Seal Island on the right conditions, a little bit of haze, and he was able to document some of this stuff that he sees, but we never do. That's how birds migrate at night, and how many at times, thousands. Okay, so we had short distance, or let's say short distance, medium distance migrants, and now we come to the long distance migrants. And we kind of had a little peek at that when we saw that golden plover that nests in the Arctic and flies down all the way to South America. They're long-winged, most of the birds that do this, long-winged and built for speed, fat, which they put on before they launch out on this migration, and they have to have food to do it, can be 50% of their body weight when they launch out over the ocean to make that long marathon flight, which is several days and nights. They fly at high altitude and also take advantage of tailwinds when they can. And all this has happened for eons, but we're only learning about some of it in recent years. There's an example, and these are the famous shorebirds that you'll see up at Mary's Point or at Dorchester Cape in August at the head of the Bay of Fundy, where they're gorging on corophyrium from the mud in the upper Bay of Fundy when the tide goes out. And those corophyrium are very, very rich in the nutrients that they need to put on weight. And within a space of 2 to 3 weeks, those birds can come out of the Arctic from all over, head unerringly to the Bay of Fundy, and feed up, and then launch out on a nonstop migration to South America. So it's amazing. Here's another example, I think, here, which is a buff-breasted sandpiper. You notice how long and streamlined the wingtips are there. This bird, again, can fly way, way down. And there again are some of the tracks of some of these birds, and they're non-stop migration from here, roughly in the Maritimes, all the way down to South America and well into South America. Incredible. And this would take them 3 to 4 days, non-stop in the air to make that trip. And what about hurricanes? What about weather patterns? Well, so that all these things are just almost beyond belief. Another bird, blackpoll warbler. For birders in the room, it's a very common warbler here, especially in the fall around the Bay of Fundy. And these birds come literally from as far away as near Alaska and fly toward the Maritimes, feed up here in the same way the shorebirds do, but on insects in the foliage on some of the shores and offshore islands, and then make again a long-distance flight from here all the way down to South America, or perhaps some of the Caribbean islands, and then in the spring go inland again like the shorebirds and back up. And that's again because the food resources in the spring, they can't get enough food in where they're wintering, put on enough fat to make a long-distance flight, one-way flight like that, so they have to sort of hop along this way day after day, sort of like the night migrants that, or even the day migrants. They go short distances, feed, all the way back up to the Arctic. So how high do those migrants of various categories fly? Probably we never thought about that before. Day migrants, usually apparently about 1,000 feet at the most, or 1,000 feet, 300 meters. Night migrants, 3 times that. And the marathoners up to 20,000 feet. One would think they could probably fly over certain weather patterns and keep right on going, or around them somehow. How do they know? Don't know. 20,000 feet. Think about the amount of oxygen to breathe at 20,000 feet. We couldn't, well, if you're climbing Mount Everest, you'd certainly find out when you get above base camp, it'd be over 18,000 feet, and that's when people have to have oxygen. These birds are flying that marathon flight as high as 20,000 feet. Fat is good, folks, in case if you didn't know. You may have heard otherwise, but anyway, when it comes to migration, okay, and maybe migration is a great way for weight loss, but we'll talk about that. Fat is twice the energy of per gram versus carbs or protein. I don't have it on my screen here, so I have to look up here to see what I'm saying. It's distributed evenly and conveniently. Fat can be distributed over the body contours of a bird in a fairly thin layer, but there's a lot of it. Then it doesn't destroy or interfere too much with their streamlined shape and their ability to fly efficiently through the air. So it's under the skin, over the body, and metabolizes also, interestingly, into a vital source of water. If a bird is flying nonstop for 2, 3, 4 days, it needs water. It can't stop to drink. It's out over the ocean or wherever. It metabolizes into a vital source of water for its system. So, to put this into perspective, imagine a bird has, a normal bird apparently has about 5% body fat when it's not migrating, when it's just doing its thing, okay? Marathon migrants build up to 50% fat, and that's been proven through shorebird studies here in the Bay of Fundy. So at 5% fat, you or me, if we weighed 120 pounds, would be about 6 pounds of fat and about 114 pounds of solid muscle. But at 50% fat, that person, you'd have to double that lean, would be 228 pounds. And now you're ready to migrate for 4 days all the way to South America or whatever. You'd normally be a blob, but the fat can be spread over the body contours. In a 72-hour to 96-hour straight line flight to take from here to, say, northern Brazil, Suriname, most of that excess flight or fat burns off. And these shorebirds have been tagged and color marked and seen 3-4 days later in northern South America and caught and weighed, and they're back to almost their normal weight that they would have had before they started putting on all that fat. Amazing stuff. All right, have we thought of this before? How do they find their way? Well, obviously there's a genetic imprinting on a young bird that has never flown before, and it doesn't go with its parents because they do migrate separately. So it has to be some genetic coding there somehow to sort of get it started and kind of imprint where it wants to go. Must come from the parents, but indirectly through some kind of genetic. So there's 3 aspects of migration. There's orientation, meaning what's the right direction that I want to go. In this case, let's say at this time of year, it's south, obviously. Navigating, maintaining that direction. The bird has to be able to maintain that directional state. And then recognizing when to stop at your destination. And if you're a young bird, if you're an adult bird, you've done it before, obviously successfully. If you're a young bird, you've never done it before, but you still got to get it right. So, there are orientation compasses as far as research knows. Now, there's a lot of unanswered questions in all these things, but certainly they have experimented with birds, and they do orient by the sun, which is obvious, and we do too. If you're out for a walk and you want to know where south is or north is or whatever, you just look at the sun and figure out the sun's going to be over there. What time is it? Yeah, there's north, there's east, there's south, there's west. Polarized light. Polarized light. And that would be light reflecting off water surfaces, for example. And so pre-dawn or after sunset, there's still polarized light, which in the case of sunset would be in the west, and in the case of sunrise would be in the east, and somehow the birds are able to, keep the southward direction. The stars, now how they would know that, but it must be genetic imprinting somehow, and when possible, the moon. And the Earth's magnetic field. There have been experiments done, and there is a magnetic field in the Earth, which I certainly don't understand, but they have been proven that birds obviously must use that in order to orient the direction that they're going in. Navigation aids also help. Things like large-scale landmarks. That would be helpful if you've made the trip before, but not if you've never made it as a young bird. So for adult birds, presumably large-scale landmarks, like the coast, like the mountain chains or major rivers or whatever. And anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. And if anybody could tell me what that means, I'd appreciate it. But that's what science has revealed. Anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. So accept it as it is, and we may know more soon. Final arrival, how do you know when you get there? How do you know when you get there? Especially if you've never been there before, but if you're an adult, prominent local landmarks could come back into it. If you spent the last winter there, it might all come back and you know you're kind of arrived, right? I got it right. A sense of smell. When you go, for those that have traveled to the tropics or faraway places, almost one of the first things that you notice when you step out of the plane is that perhaps different odors, different smells. The tropics certainly smell very differently to me when I go there. So that might help. Others of their own kind. Presence of other shorebirds, for example. If you're a long-distance shorebird, you can see and hear others of your own kind. So, didn't see them, hear them all the way down. Now you've suddenly arrived. So that would be another key. And then this whole mystery of genetic imprinting. sort of like it's all coded in your brain as a bird, and you just know. That's as far as I could explain that, but it's there somehow, has to be. All right, Panama, Central America. We saw where the hawks funneled through there on that map. A wonderful place. Birds tend to overwinter there in Central America, all up and down, Mexico, southern Mexico, and northern and even southern South America. And those birds in the springtime, if they're headed back to Canada, or at least to North America, they're going to want to trend north at some point. When? When do you start doing that? When's the right time? If you're too late, you're going to miss an opportunity to raise a family up there. If you're too early, you could risk getting into bad weather and an unfortunate outcome. So what happens here? Well, this is, I don't know who that guy is, but he's down there somewhere, and there's one heck of a big tree, and he's probably looking at some of those wintering warblers, so wood warblers or vireos or some of the other songbirds that we have that will be wintering down there during the winter. And when they start back, and we're not talking about any particular species here, but songbirds in general, there's a couple of places where they especially congregate on their northward migration, on their return back toward us. One would be coming out of Venezuela, Colombia, and up through the Caribbean islands, and then on to Florida, and then on up into eastern North America, presumably. And the other, for those that might be in western South America and Central America, the Yucatan is a launching point here to cross the Gulf of Mexico, 600 miles, and come in on the Texas coast, Texas-Louisiana coast, about 18 hours later. And Jean and I happened to be down in this area, right here, when the migration was happening in April. And this is what the Texas coast at Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge looks like. You know, the Gulf of Mexico is behind us, and we're looking in on the shore, and you can see distant trees, maybe a few miles inland. Well, these songbirds launch off the Yucatan, that's that point of land we just saw, and cross the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of them. And they do that just after dark, okay? They fly all night. They still haven't reached shore by dawn, but they continue, and by around late morning or noon, the birds tend to arrive on the coast of Texas. So what they see when they come in off there, they know they've got to head up there somewhere. They're looking for trees, and they don't find them. So they have to fly on inland a bit, just along the coast, to find the first sizable trees where they can come down and rest and hopefully feed and hopefully be safe. Now, they've been about 18 hours in the air, and they're tired. So the birders down there that want to see these migrants, they get to sleep in because they're not much going to happen until about noon. So late in the morning, they start assembling along the shore. This is in April. And this is the Sabine Woods on the coast of Texas, Gulf Coast, early April. Jean and I were there. And those people are on a boardwalk, and these boardwalks snake all through these trees, which are about the first trees that these birds see when they come in, and they head for them. So you go there at 11 o'clock, not a whole lot there, because yesterday's birds have all moved on. But pretty soon, you'll realize that, whoa, there's something up there in the tree that wasn't there before. You didn't see it come in because you've got a canopy over your head. Birds, there's another one. Pretty soon, the woods are full of birds, incoming birds. By 1, 2 o'clock, you got birds all over the place. One of the interesting things when we were there for the birders in the room, because we were looking at all kinds of, southern warblers, all kinds of color and things we don't see at all. And there was this group of birders on the boardwalk, all clustered around this amazing bird that they'd found. What it is, it's a black-throated green warbler, a very, very common bird for us, quite unusual down that far south. And they were oohing and awing and so excited about this black-throated green warbler. We looked at, and went over and started looking at the birds that they had turned their backs on. So it just depends on where you come from. This is a little yellow-bellied sapsucker that came in, a little woodpecker that we have commonly here in the summer, migrates in the winter. I didn't realize they went down that far, but it crossed the Gulf, coming north, and immediately landed on this tree right beside the path folded his head under his wing and went sound asleep, exhausted, well, really tired. And I literally could have reached up and picked it off the tree. It was that close. Didn't care. It was very tired. But they perk up again, and they start to feed, rejuvenated, a few days there, and then further north they fly at night. Okay, so they make it all the way to New Brunswick and other parts of North America, of course, and southern Canada. And so by mid-May, their migration of these birds that have spent the winter in the tropics, these are insectivorous songbirds. They could be warblers, vireos, tanagers, thrushes, yeah, a whole variety of things. Just as the leaves are coming out, just when you got to clean up the backyard or the cottage and the black flies are starting to buzz and bother you and the mosquitoes, well, those are hamburgers to a small bird, right? And so the timing of their arrival back here is timed for the opening of the leaves. So almost without fail, depending on the season or the year, the birds will arrive just coincident with the opening of the leaves and the emergence of insects. And so what you'll get in New Brunswick would be something like a yellow warbler, which would have spent the winter down in Central America, probably Central America, lots of color, and they'll be singing because they want to announce their arrival. They want to find a mate, and eventually they want to set up a breeding territory. So that's why when we get these spring birds coming in, overnight, you wake up in the morning and there's bird song. It wasn't here yesterday. They came in overnight. Usually from about the 15th of May to the 25th of May is just that time when a lot of these birds will arrive. You've got this little beach. That's right, little beach down in Grand Manan, down near the southern end. And the day had been kind of cold and wet and raw, but it was in the right time period in May. And we happened to stand up and look down at the kelp down on the beach, and it was alive with songbirds, hopping all over, catching flies in this sheltered place out of the wind where a little bit of warmer air, and there was lots of bugs around the kelp. Pick, 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 they're all over the place. So I took a couple of pictures. There was a American redstart hopping around, grabbing bugs all over the place, which you couldn't find up in the wind, right? There was Blackburnian warblers, which are normally up in the high trees, up in the spruces and firs, down on the beach, picking insects. This is what they do. They'll adapt. We actually, not on that day, but on another occasion out on Whitehead Island in the spring, found a very unusual for New Brunswick hooded warbler, which was an overshoot that should have stopped down in mid-Atlantic states, and it ended up coming up and dropping in New Brunswick. So the migration isn't always unerring, but it only stays a few days, reorients, head back south, probably. They don't stay long. Back to where it should be, and find a mate, build a nest. I'm getting near the end of this now, but there's another aspect of migration, and I'll just preface this little piece by saying New Brunswick, I think I was introduced as having seen 400 birds in New Brunswick. New Brunswick's official bird list is around 443 species. The Canadian list, excluding seabirds that would not, from the west coast, that would not be seen, anywhere else but on the water out there. The Canadian list, all of Canada, coast to coast to coast, is around 560 species of birds. We have 443 that have been seen in New Brunswick by somebody, documented. And the Canadian list of land birds is something in the order of 560, 565. So we've seen over 70% of all of Canada's birds, and that's from the Arctic to the US border, to the east, to the west, in New Brunswick. And Nova Scotia's has equal numbers, if not more. Why do we have such a variety of birds here? Well, very quickly, think about weather. Weather patterns move across the continent from west to east. And when the breeding season is over for birds, and they're starting to get that migratory urge that we talked about earlier, they don't always fly south immediately. Some of them will get restless, but follow the weather patterns east. And when they follow them east, flying right over Manitoba and Ontario and Quebec even, they hit the coast. And what happens then? They're running out of land. And they sense that, and they'll drop down. So New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland have great lists of birds, a lot of them from the West Coast. A lot of the intervening provinces have never had some of the birds that we get here just for that very reason. So it's quite amazing. And so this goes back a long way, this picture, but this is Peter Code, if anybody remembers Peter. He was on, I guess, CTV, wasn't it? Yeah. He's retired now long. But he talked about the jet stream all the time, which is a sort of a weather pattern that draws low-pressure areas with it. And in the fall, we get this jet stream coming from south or west and coming a lot of the time right through the Maritimes, right through our area here. And so when that happens, we can get things from all over the place. Just last weekend, we had a scissor-tailed flycatcher from Arizona, Texas, northern Mexico, here in New Brunswick, up in Aulac, I think it was. And we had a western flycatcher from out on the prairies, showed up in New Brunswick, brought with weather patterns moving from west to east. So, what sort of birds might we see? This is a Townsend's warbler, very, very few of them seen in the province. That's west of the Rocky Mountains. Showed up in Fundy National Park, the first one. This one is a western tanager, again, from the same region. Showed up in Westfield late in the summer, or late in the fall. I'm almost done here, by the way. This is a fork-tailed flycatcher, not found in North America at all as a native. It's found in Mexico and Central America, and we've probably had 20 to 25 fork-tailed flycatchers show up in New Brunswick over the years. Probably one of the highest numbers of any state and province in North America, just because of that jet stream. So I'm going to wrap it up. So I'm going to ask you this question. What do those Arctic terns, remember the long-distance migrant Arctic tern, south or north to South Antarctica, what do they do once they've flown halfway around the world? Well, Gary Larson had the answer. That's as much as we know. Except that they do it unerringly and they make their way back the next year and they live a long time. Anyway, that's a, sort of an insight into some of the whys and the wherefores of bird migration, the mysteries, and an awful lot left to learn. The more you know, the more questions you have to ask. But it's a wonderful time because there's a lot of research going into bird migration now. And I'll just mention that I was reading just recently, some of these shorebirds do amazing things. Bar-tailed godwits, it's another long-billed, long-winged shorebird that nest in Alaska, parts of Alaska, fly from there nonstop for 6 days, nonstop. It's just been recently discovered. They're probably one of the longest one-way migrants of any land bird known to get to Hawaii and then beyond. And it's, again, some of this amazing new stuff that's coming up. So that's it. I have no idea what time it is. I probably went way over my time. Yeah, I guess I have. What time do we start? 1:30? Yeah. No, I guess I'm okay. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Just a few questions. If I don't want to keep you, but any questions about anything? Doesn't have to be about birds. Yeah, Ray.
You know what prompts them to actually go? Is it the length of daylight or is it temperature?
Yeah, I actually had a slide in here that should have talked to that, but somehow I skipped over it. Yeah, day length is they say is one of the primary motivators. And as the days shorten in the fall, or as the days lengthen in the spring, it triggers the urge to set off, along with other factors. There could be a cold front or a warm front, depending on the season, that would also add to that impetus, and maybe the right wind direction would be helpful too. But it's something that like the night on Machias Seal Island that he took those pictures, the lighthouse keeper, thousands of birds were on the move. So it wasn't just one bird got the message. It was, thousands moved that night, whatever the conditions. Yeah, that's the kinds of things that motivate migration. Yeah, the thing I always marvel at is how does May the 21st differ from May the 7th in terms of day length? There's not a whole lot of difference, okay? But probably the temperature does. But even from one day to the next, sometimes we'll have our hummingbirds come back on just about exactly the same day as they were there last year. And there's a certain amount of weather variation, but the length of the days has something to do with it as well. It's very precise and very amazing.
Some of these migrating birds can be picked up on radar, especially in the spring when they're coming through in large numbers.
Yeah.
Weather radar sites
Yep.
see whether it's been a big migration night or a small migration night because they pick up the numbers on the.
Yep. I don't know if you heard the question, but she was just my wife, Jean. She was saying, reminding me that they can pick up large numbers of migrants on radar. Radar is sensitive enough now. When the flocks are dense enough, they can be picked up very clearly on radar. So there's actually online, you can go onto sites where, is this a good night, a poor night, a moderate night for migrants? And it'll show you on the map where the hot spots are for birds moving on that particular night. So if you're a birder, you can be there tomorrow if it's in your area. Yes? I do have a favorite bird. Hopefully you do too. My favorite bird, I think, is a bluebird. I love an eastern bluebird. I don't know, there's just something about it. I love the thrush family anyway. They're a thrush. But bluebirds are pretty. They nest in birdhouses. You can attract them to your property. They're just a nice bird to have around. They've got a lovely, soft, warbling song. Yeah, eastern bluebird. Do you have a favorite? What? Goldfinch, golden finch, yeah. Well, there's another example. Nice and bright goldfinch. It's yellow, black wings, black tail, yeah, yeah. And comes to a bird feeder too, I'll bet. Good for you, yeah. Yes?
So do most birds migrate in flocks?
It depends on the species, or at least it depends on the type of birds. Like blackbirds will migrate in flocks generally, but there can be mixed species, but they're all similar. Could be the red-winged blackbird, rusty blackbirds, grackles. They'll often make a mixed flock. Waterfowl, geese, swans, most of the, I wouldn't say most, no, but some do specialize in flocks. And the ones we know about particularly are the ones that are day flyers, because you can see them, right? The ones we see at night, like the ones he showed in his photographs at the lighthouse, are just an aggregation of all kinds of birds that set off, not necessarily as a flock, but aggregated at the lighthouse because of the attraction of a light. Migrating birds, on a misty night especially, are attracted like moths to a flame. And you remember the flame situation out at Canaport, right? Those birds were attracted on a kind of a misty night, wrong conditions, and the flame was burning, and as they flew toward it, like moths literally to a flame, they couldn't stop. And when the heat started to get intense, they tried to veer away. They couldn't, and they just went down. And some of them were burned very badly. So not all birds, most birds don't migrate in flocks. Most migrate singly or in small groups, perhaps, of the same species. One of the pictures there was of 4 white-throated sparrows sitting on a window ledge there of the lighthouse. That would probably be a night where quite a few were moving, but not necessarily as a flock.
So if the birds that mate for life, do they fly with their mate?
Yes, I would think that's probable. Yeah, like swans, for example, cranes, swans, geese. Apparently, they pair bond for the life of the two, but if something happens to one, the other will probably pair with another mate. That's a survival thing, I think, in terms of the species. Yeah. Yes, sir. Which? Loons? Probably yes, because loons, here at our latitude, of course, they get forced out of any freshwater body in the winter, and a lot of them go to the coast. And then from the coast, some of them go all the way down as far as at least the mid-United States, if not further. But the majority of them, we believe, stay in the northern part of the eastern coast. But some stretch all the way down. But then some of those loons also that we see going by our coast go as far as the tree line, further north too. So yeah, short to medium distance, I would say, typically, yeah. Yes?
I don't recall
Yep, great question. Great question. Probably when you were young, you didn't notice the few that might have been around. But robins, they're pretty tough, first of all. They will stay if they find a really good crop of mountain ash berries, for example, or an orchard with all kinds of crab apples that are just right, a food source that will hold them, and it's usually fruit. They have the ability to move. Robins are one of the species that can move from a diet of insects and earthworms in the summer to fruit and berries in the winter and still be fine. So in years when we have really good, it's usually mountain ash crops that keep them, we'll have all kinds of robins if there's a big mountain ash crop locally. But if there isn't, they'll move further south, but they only go about as far as they need to find a food source, which usually takes them into the United States before the winter's over. And then climate change is at work too. We're having milder winters. So that may be another factor that will show itself even more over time. But the majority of these birds tend to migrate still. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Really? Yeah. She's talking about, Will is talking about at her cottage over on Long Reach, right? Yeah, Kingston Peninsula. She's not seeing as many loons in the last several years. This year in particular, yeah. I don't know, boat traffic maybe, I don't know if there's more. But there's the St. John Naturalist Club, again, that I'm involved with, and Willa and Ray and Jan, several others. It has a project at the tip of Point Lepreau in collaboration with NB Power, because it gives us access to the tip of the point. We count every spring and every fall, particularly in spring, migrating seabirds, including loons and ducks and all manner of birds that would fly by every year. We've been doing it for almost 30 years. And there doesn't seem any lack of loons in the passage there. Now those birds, some of them are certainly going much further north, but our numbers this past year were even more, actually, than we've had in the past. I think during the month of May, over 10,000 loons were counted going by. That's in total, right? And that's higher than we've ever had before. But we also extended our observations into May a little further this past year, too. So it doesn't seem to be. Maybe it's just a coincidence this year. Well, they might be. Maybe the boat traffic interferes a little bit with seeing them right off your cottage. Maybe. Yeah. Don't know. Anybody else? I don't want to keep you. Yes, one more hand. Yes. Grouse are another one that stay with us all year. Yep, they don't migrate. Well, young birds of a lot of these species will tend to wander and disperse a little bit, but they don't actually have a migration. It's a non-migratory bird. Yeah, yeah, rough grouse. Okay, Cheryl, I think we're going to wrap it up.